Hello students, I am here with another video from the chapter of class 7th NCERT book, that is Reproduction in Plants. Before starting today's video, I would like to tell you all that till now what all things we have discussed in this chapter. So we are about to complete this chapter as we have discussed about the reproduction. The term which is known as reproduction means what is the meaning, and then we have also discussed about the concept, the different types of reproduction. There were mainly two types of reproduction, that is the asexual and sexual mode of reproduction in plants. So when we discussed about asexual mode of reproduction in plants, we have seen this as an example of the budding and the fragmentation, where budding is always taking place in the fungi and fragmentation was taking place in the algae. Okay, and after that we saw that there is one more type of asexual mode of reproduction, that is known as vegetative propagation. Now if we talk about vegetative propagation, then it means that we are talking about the ways by which the plant could reproduce, but it is not reproducing with the reproductive part, or that is the flower. It is going to reproduce other than the flower. Okay, so the part which are left except flower, it means that the leaves, the stem, the roots, all these are responsible for the production of a new plant, and that is why it is known as vegetative propagation, as the vegetative parts are only involved in the production of a new plant. Okay, so this was about the vegetative propagation, and then we have also seen the types by which the ways by which this vegetative propagation is taking place. That were the ways were the cutting, layering, grafting, where one plant is being bent in the soil and it is being layered. The branch is being bent and it is being layered with the soil, and then after some time the new plant, as you could see, a new plant is coming out from that layered part of the main branch. So from there, that side, we are going to cut off that plant, and then what we do is we are going to separate that that parent plant from the daughter plant. Okay, and then we will see that a new plant is going to be generated. Next thing we discussed about it was the cutting, where the different types of stem cuttings were done, and because of the stem cuttings, then what happened, the time which was being utilized for the growth of that plant, that was minimized, or that was reduced. Okay, so this is the main advantage of doing vegetative propagation, where we could produce many plants at a single time. Okay, and one more advanced technique of vegetative propagation was the tissue culture. So while tissue culturing, the plants are then generated inside a test tube, or once they are being successfully reproduced inside the test tubes, or they are going to increase in number, the small plantlets are being developed inside the test tube. So what happens, we are just taking it out and we are just putting it into the soil. Okay, now after that, what we have discussed was the agents of we have started discussing about the sexual mode of reproduction, where the flowering plant are of two types. One was unisexual flowers and the plants with the bisexual flowers. So where we discussed that if the plants are having bisexual flowers, then they have to undergo two processes, that is the pollination and fertilization. Even the unisexual flower has to undergo the next process of sexual mode of reproduction, that was the pollination and fertilization, where we saw that pollination is of two types. So it is of two types. One is the self pollination, other one was the cross pollination, where in the self pollination, the same flower is used for the formation, for the transference of pollen grains from anther to stigma, whereas in bisexual flowers, in unisexual flowers, the two flowers were responsible for the same purpose, where the anther was on another plant and the pistil was on the another plant, or it was in another flower. So because of the presence of these two parts in two different flowers, what happens, the anther of one flower was used for the pollen, for the purpose of the transfer of the pollen grain from one anther to the another stigma of the another flower on the another plant, or it is on the same plant but the flower is different. So in this case, what happens, the flower is going to be produced, it is going to be present, and then what happens, the transference is taking place, but it could take place at the different flowers, or it could take place at the different plants even. So this was the first step of the sexual mode of reproduction. Okay, then we have next step of this sexual mode of reproduction was the fertilization. Once the pollen grains have reached the stigma of the flower, it is to undergo the division. It has to undergo fusion first, and then it forms zygote. That zygote develops into an embryo. That embryo is going to develop and form it is going to form a seed. So what happens once it forms a seed, then it is going to that ovary in which the ovule was later present. Then what happens, it was earlier present, then later on it forms the fruit, whereas the ovules which were earlier present, they will form the seed. So we can say that the ovary of a flower is going to be the fruit in future, and the ovule of a flower is going to be the seed in the future. So that is how sexual reproduction takes place. And we have also discussed about the agents of pollination, okay, and where the pollination was taking place with some certain helpers like birds, air, water, human beings, insects. So these are the ways by which the transference of pollen grain is taking place. Next we discussed about another step was that seed formation, and then lastly we discussed about the seed dispersal. Once the seed is being formed, it has to disperse from one place to another place. So similarly, agents of dispersal also were being discussed. Now in the last of this so the text part of your chapter was over yesterday itself. Now today I am going to discuss about few points which are given at the last of your chapter. So the first point among that is this keyword. So these keywords are given in the last of your NCERT book. I have taken this part from the NCERT book itself. So this NCERT book these keywords are very much, they are going to help you in recalling the things which we have studied, and also they are going to help in the question answer part. So first thing is that asexual mode of reproduction. What do you mean by asexual mode of reproduction? So asexual mode of reproduction means it is the process of reproduction. It is a way by which the seeds are not being utilized and the new plants are growing. They are growing without the help of the seeds. Okay, so without seeds if they are growing, so they are known as the asexual mode of reproduction. Fine. Now next thing what we will discuss is the next part, that is this budding. So this budding means, budding is another form of asexual mode of reproduction, where this one of the yeast was present, from that one small outgrowth was developed and that was being detached from the plant, and then that is being used as a new plant. Okay. So this new small bud is going to be detached from the parent plant, and once it is going to be detached from the parent plant, it is going to grow into a new seed. It is going to grow into a new yeast. Okay, next word is this embryo. Embryo means it is developed. It is a developed part of the zygote. Now where is this zygote produced? Once the fertilization has taken place, then the male and the female gametes okay, they are being united. Okay, they are being fused. So because of which what happens, a new structure is being formed, that is called zygote. Now this zygote is going to divide, it is going to develop, and it forms an embryo. Okay, once this embryo is being formed, this embryo develops into a seed. So what do you mean by embryo? Embryo is the developed part of the zygote. Okay, similarly, next word which we have to discuss is this fertilization. So what is fertilization? Fertilization is the fusion of male and female gametes inside the ovary. So fusion always takes place inside the ovary, please remember. Okay, so fusion always is taking place inside the ovary. Where was it? If you remember that this was stigma, then style, then ovary was there, and one gamete was already present. This was known as ovule. Now if the pollen grain is coming, it was containing the male gamete. So male gametes is present in the form of the pollen grain, whereas the female gamete is present in the form of the ovule. Okay, so this was being fused together. So because of which what happens, the fusion, once this is being fused, this forms a zygote. So this zygote is this process of fusion of male and female gamete is known as the fertilization. and this takes place inside the ovary. And what happens after, as a result of fertilization, a zygote is produced. So once this zygote develops, this develops into an embryo, and after this embryo is going to develop in the form of the seeds. Okay, so this was all about the development, and this was all about the fertilization where it is taking place. Next word is fragmentation. Now what is this fragmentation? I told you that fragmentation is a long word which is going to it is made up of two words. Fragmentation means fragment, and tion, fragmentation. So this fragmentation is always taking place inside the lower plants such as algae. So this algae, when it breaks into two parts, suppose that this was Spirogyra and this was an alga, where this was broken down into two parts. So if part 1 is there, so this was missing, so this was being developed inside with the same alga where this was, from where it has been detached. If the fragments is being produced, fragment means pieces are being produced, then those fragments or the pieces, small structures of algae, they are going to regain its length. The parts which are missing, they are going to develop, and then if it is going to develop, and it forms a new alga again. So that is how the fragmentation is taking place. Fragmentation takes place in the lower organisms, where we have seen in lower plants, and lower plants means we have seen in alga or algae, we could say, and this alga especially we have seen this in Spirogyra. Okay, so the Spirogyra is an algae where this fragmentation is commonly being seen in when sometimes this breaks up, the fragments of the algae breaks up, and it forms three small fragments, and all those 2 or 3 small fragments, they are going to germinate, they are going to grow in the form of new plant. Okay, so this is how the fragmentation is taking place. Next is the gametes. So gametes are what? Gametes are those special cells which are present in the means that they are present in the reproductive organs of a plant. That is, the pollen grains are the male gametes, and the ovule is a female gamete. So gamete, these are the special cells which have the potential, which have the power, or you could say which have the power to undergo sexual reproduction. Okay, so they have a capacity to form a new plant with the help of a seed. So these gametes are those special cells, these are those cells which will participate in the sexual mode of reproduction, and they are going to give rise to a new plant species after fertilization. So next word which we have to see is the hyphae. Hypha is the structure which is present in the fungi, and as you talk about a plant, we can say that that plant has a root, okay, that has a stem, that has branches. Okay, but what about the lower plants such as fungi? So in fungi, these roots and stem is known as hyphae. Hypha or hyphae. Okay, hypha is a singular word and hyphae is a plural word. So once the fungi are going to develop a tube-like structure which is going to form which helps in the absorption of water. So these kinds of structure is known as the hyphae. Okay, next is the ovule. Next part which we need to discuss is the ovule. So ovule is another structure which is it is the female gamete which is present in the ovary. So this ovule is the female gamete which is present in the ovary, okay, which is going to form a seed after the fertilization. Okay, next word which we need to discuss is this pollen grain. So what do you mean by pollen grain? Pollen grain is the structure, these are the powdery structures which are present in the anther, inside the anther, and they are going to give rise to a male gamete. So pollen grains are those structures which are going to form, which has the this pollen grain is having the male gametes, and this pollen grain is only responsible for the formation of the seeds once it is going to fuse with the ovule. Okay, so this was about pollen grain. Next is the pollen tube. What is the meaning of the word pollen tube? Pollen tube means it is the tube which is developed after the pollination. Once the pollen grains resides, or once the pollen grain is resting over stigma, this stigma develops. These pollen grains are going to develop a pollen tube. Because of the help of this pollen tube, the male gamete is going to transfer, it is going to transport inside the it is going to come near to the ovule of the ovary, which is present inside the ovary, and where the fertilization will take place. Okay, so pollen grains are the male gametes. These are the structure which contains male gametes. And where is this pollen grain produced? They are always produced in the anther. So inside anther, if you talk about, these are anthers. So inside anther, what happens? We have the pollen grain. Okay, so if we talk about anther, so inside this we have the pollen grain. So each pollen grain is said to be as a male gamete, which is going to help in the formation of the seed. Fine. Next word which we need to discuss is this pollination. So now, since we have discussed about we have discussed more about all these things, we have already been seen with this. What do you mean by pollination? We can easily find out that pollination is a process by which the transfer of the pollen grains is taking place from the anther to the stigma. Okay, so this pollen grain is a process by which the transfer of the pollen grains from the anther to stigma is taking place. Okay, next, what is the next word? Next word is the seed dispersal. So as I have discussed yesterday itself, that what is the meaning of the word dispersal? Dispersal means to move from one place to another. To travel from one place to another, to move, not okay, it could be a small distance, it could be a large distance. Now if we talk about, we are talking about the seeds which are being dispersed, they are moving from one place to another place. Now once the movement of the seed is taking place, this is known as seed dispersal, and there are various agents which are responsible for the seed dispersal. It could be water, it could be air, it could be wind, it could be human beings, it could be animals, birds. So seed dispersal means it is the way by which the seeds are going to travel. They are going to move from one place to another place with the help of some agents. Okay, and next is the word which we need to discuss is this sexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction is a process of reproduction, or it is the way by which a new plant is going to produce with the help of seeds. Now what are spores? Spores are the microscopic structure which are present in the fungi, and they are going to give rise to a new fungi once it is going to germinate on the dead and decaying matter. So spore formation is always taking place in the fungi, where the fruiting body contains a large number of these microscopic structures which are responsible for the growth of the fungi on the dead and decaying leaves or any other dead and decaying matter. So fungus will always grow with the help of these spores. Fine. Now next we need to discuss is the sporangium. Now if we talk about a bread mold, so this was the structure of bread mold. So this is known as sporangium. The sporangium is a place where spores are being produced. So it is a bag-like structure. It is the outer covering where the spores are being produced inside the mold. Okay. Next word which we will discuss is this vegetative propagation. And at the beginning of today's video also I told you that what do you mean by vegetative propagation. So again, vegetative propagation is a long word. Vegetative and propagation. Propagation means to increase, and vegetative means the vegetative part other than flower. Okay, other than flower. Now if other than flower, what is left in the plant? We have leaves, we have stem, we have root. So all these are the parts which will count which will be counted under the heading of the vegetative parts, and flower will be counted under the heading of reproductive part. Why? Because vegetative parts are not able to form the seeds, whereas the reproductive parts are of a plant or a flower is responsible for the seed development. This vegetative part is going to produce the exact copy of the plant. Okay, you could say that it is the Xerox copy of a plant. Whereas once the plants which are which are germinating or which are being generated from the seeds, they are entirely different from each other. Whether I think they look same, but at the cellular level they are different. Okay, so this is about the vegetative propagation. Next thing we will discuss is the zygote. What is the zygote? Zygote is the first structure which is formed after fertilization of male and female gamete. So zygote is the simplest structure which is formed after fertilization of the male and female gametes. So this was all about the keywords, children. Okay. So next thing which we will discuss is we move on to the next slide. Yes, we move on to the next slide here, which is again a part of your NCERT book where you could see what we have learnt. Now what we have learnt means we will see the recap of this chapter. We are going to see that what all things we have understood from this chapter. Now why I am telling you this will be helpful in forming the answers very easily and very quickly also. So the first we'll discuss each and every point one by one which is given in your NCERT book. Okay. So the first point says all organisms multiply or reproduce their own kind. This is very important because we can see only the seeds are going to give rise to the same particular tree. For example, a mango seed is there. This mango seed is going to give rise to a mango tree. It is not going to give rise to a lychee tree, or it is not going to give rise to a grapevine. Okay, so many we could say that each and every organism multiply and reproduce their own kind. So this own kind word means it is going to produce their own variety. It is not going to be changed. So this is why all organisms are going to reproduce. Okay, and they are only reproducing their own kind. Fine. Next thing is that in the plant there are two modes of reproduction, that is asexual mode and the sexual mode. So this was very clear that the second part, all the plants have two modes of reproduction, that is the asexual and the sexual mode. Asexual mode, which is always taking place in the plants except without formation of the seeds or without the involvement of the seeds. Okay, and sexual reproduction is always taking place because of the formation or the involvement of the seeds. So once the seeds are being formed, there it is said to be it is a sexual mode of reproduction. Okay, next we will discuss about there are several methods. We'll move on to the third point. Now it says that there are several methods of asexual mode of reproduction, such as fragmentation, where one animal is broken down, one plant is broken down, or the fragments are into fragments, and each and every fragment which is incomplete is going to complete and form a new plant. Okay, next is the budding. So in budding, the yeast is going to develop an outgrowth, and that outgrowth is going to form a new yeast. Okay, why it is happening? A small yeast is present on just above that its body. It is going to develop a small outgrowth, a bud like structure. This bud like structure is going to be detached from the parent plant, and as a result what happens is bud grows into a new plant. And we could not say that it is a plant, but it is a very primitive, it is the non-green plant, that is the fungi, where this is seen, this budding is seen. Fragmentation is being shown by the algae, whereas budding is always being shown by the fungi. And you have also studied about the example of yeast, okay, where multiple budding also takes place. Next is the spore formation. So this spore formation is the way by which spores are being formed. These are spores are the microscopic structure which is present, which is going to develop from the mold or from the fungi, and they are capable of reproducing. They are capable of producing a new plant, as it is responsible for the spore formation. It is responsible for spore formation, or it is going to form the spores. Next thing is that, and the vegetative propagation it happens. Next is the vegetative propagation. So vegetative propagation is a way by which the plants are going to reproduce with the help of the vegetative parts. Okay. Next thing is that the sexual reproduction involves the fusion of male and female gametes. So sexual reproduction is always involving the fusion of male and female gamete, means that from one part of a flower, that is the anther, that is the pollen grain which develops the male gamete, and the ovary where ovule is present, that ovule is known as the female gamete. So they are going to give rise to a new structure once they are being fused. So the fusion is known as the fertilization, and after that, as a result of fertilization, the zygote is being developed inside the ovary of the flower. Next point says, in the vegetative propagation, a new plants are produced from different vegetative parts such as leaves, stems and the roots. So in vegetative propagation, a new plants are produced from the different vegetative parts such as these parts. Now why this vegetative propagation is taking place from these parts? Because they are known as the vegetative parts. That is why propagation, that is why an increase in number is taking place, and this is because of these parts. Okay, so that is why it is known as the vegetative propagation. It could be from tissue culture, it could be from grafting, it could be from cutting, it could be from layering. Okay, so many artificial ways of vegetative propagation are present nowadays, whereas in the nature also you could see that the plants are growing from their stems, such as in the potato, such as in the ginger, such as in the bulbs like onion and the garlic. Okay, similarly the other vegetative parts like stem is present, stem we have discussed, so leaves if it is present. So leaves are also responsible for the reproduction, as in bryophyllum you have seen the notches of that bryophyllum leaf is going to develop a new plant. Okay, so it is going to develop a new plant. So that is how the new plant was developed, and as a result of the vegetative propagation from the leaves, the bryophyllum was able to reproduce just because of the formation of a new plant from the notches of the leaves. Okay, so in vegetative propagation, a new plant is always developed from these parts. Now from the roots which we have seen in the dahlia roots, where the roots were responsible for the development of a new plant. Okay, so the next point says the flower is a reproductive part of a plant. Now why this flower is known as a reproductive part? As we could recall the structure of a flower like this, it was present. So if we recall this structure of a flower, what you would say that there are different parts, but the part which is present, so this one, this middle part, this is known as a pistil, and the next reproductive part was this anther. So this anther and this is known as stamen, where anther and filament is present in the stamen, and pistil contains the stigma, style and ovary. So these two parts are present inside a flower. So that is why flower is known as a reproductive part of a plant. Okay, next thing is that a flower may be unisexual with either male and female or both the reproductive parts. So flower could be bisexual or unisexual, because if the flower is having either of the two parts, then it is known as the unisexual flower, and if it is having both the parts of the female reproductive part, that is both male and female, both the reproductive parts are present in one single flower, it is known as bisexual. So I have given you as a homework to write down 5 unisexual flowers and 5 bisexual flowers, where you have seen that the unisexual flower consists of the for example papaya flower is there. Okay, so it has the different plants itself where the flowers are present, but they are on the different plants. But sometimes in coccinea or some other plants are there where you could see that only flowers are different, but they are present on the same plant. So this is about the unisexual flowers, and bisexual flowers are those which are present normally, which you could see that anther and filament, I mean stamen as well as pistil, both the parts are present together. So that is why the flower is always or of two types, where the flower will be having only one reproductive part, that will be known as the unisexual flower, otherwise it will be known as a bisexual flower. Next part says that bisexual flower has both male and female, it has both male and female reproductive part. Yes, we have already discussed that if the bisexual flower is there, it means that it will contain both the reproductive part male and the female reproductive part. Okay, so we have seen that if bisexual flower is present, it means that it will have both the reproductive part in the same flower. Okay, the flowers will be same, which contains both these parts. One of the part is responsible for the development of the male gamete, okay, and one other part is responsible for the development of the female gamete. And this male gamete is always present inside the pollen grain, and this female gamete is always present in the ovule. So we could easily say that the bisexual flower is a collection of both the reproductive parts, where the reproductive parts are only responsible for the development of the male and the female gamete, which will be next, it will be responsible for the fertilization, okay, and after fertilization a zygote will be formed. After zygote formation, embryo will be formed, then the seeds will be formed. Okay, so this is about the bisexual mode of flower. For example, you could say you could see the rose plant, your rose flowers, the marigold flowers, all these flowers are bisexual type. Why? Because it contains both the parts. Pea plant is there, okay, so many plants are there, as you could see, which all these which are in advanced form. So you could see that these types of flowers are having both the reproductive parts. Okay, so children, that's all for today's video, and we have discussed a lot about the chapter, and we are about to finish this chapter. So what we have learnt, this is the half part of the topic, and I'll just cover up the remaining part in next video. So children, that's all for today's video. I will meet you all in the next video with the next topics to be discussed.